My children stopped visiting after my husband's funeral. Not a call, not a card. Months passed, seasons changed, and still nothing. But when I slipped and hit my head on the bathroom floor, they rushed in, not to hold my hand, not to sit by my bed. Number. They came for the papers, the deed, the accounts, the house that still smelled of his aftershave. They wore their concern like masks wide, plastered smiles stretched too thin to hide the gleam in their eyes. I lay there in that hospital bed, stitches tight against my scalp, and listened as they whispered in the hallway. "We'll have to step in now. She shouldn't handle all this alone. It's time." They spoke as though I wasn't breathing, as though I'd already been tucked away neatly into some quiet corner of their lives, out of sight and out of mind, like a family photo turned to face the wall. But I was awake, very awake. They thought I was lonely. They thought I was fragile. They thought I would be grateful for their sudden attention. But I wasn't lonely. I was taking notes. I heard every word. I saw every sideways glance. I watched my son slip papers into his leather briefcase while my daughter-in-law assured the nurse, "We'll handle her affairs from here." Affairs. As if my life was a stack of bills and policies to be managed like some old office filing cabinet. The doctors called it a mild concussion. They said I should rest. And I did, quietly, still as stone. But inside, my mind stayed sharp, calculating, watching, waiting. They thought I was done. They thought this fall had finished me. But they forgot who raised them, who held them through fevers, who worked 2 jobs so they could stand where they stand. They held the papers like trophies. But I held something else. The truth, the dates, the names, the plan. The house was small, but it was full of noise, full of laughter, full of dreams. My children ran barefoot through its narrow halls, sticky fingers trailing along the walls I scrubbed clean every night. The carpet was threadbare, but the beds were warm. There was always enough, barely, but enough. Because I made sure of it. I worked, I cleaned, I fed them before I fed myself. Mornings started before the sun. The alarm would buzz in the dark, and I would rise quietly so I wouldn't wake them. Coffee was my only breakfast most days. I buttoned my uniform, pinned my hair back, and slipped out into the cold. The diner needed me for the morning shift, and the cleaning company needed me in the afternoons. I ran between jobs like a thread pulled tight, always stretching but never breaking. Evenings belonged to them. I would sit at the kitchen table after work, sewing tiny dresses for my daughter, patching knees in my son's jeans. The hum of the sewing machine was the soundtrack of my life. Midnight would come and go as I stitched by the flicker of a single lamp. They never noticed that I wore the same shoes for years. They never saw how often I skipped my own plate to make sure theirs were full. That was how I wanted it. I worked, I cleaned, I fed them before I fed myself. When school supplies were due, I found ways. Secondhand stores for backpacks. Discount bins for notebooks. I learned to stretch every penny until it was paper thin. My daughter wanted piano lessons. My son needed tutoring. I said yes every time. I worked a 3rd shift when I had to. They never heard me cry at night over unpaid bills. I worked. I cleaned. I fed them before I fed myself. Their father helped when he could, but it was always me holding everything together. Doctor visits, school meetings, scraped knees, broken hearts, I was there for all of it. I never dreamed of vacations or new dresses for myself. My dream was simpler. 2 children who would never know the cold scrape of hunger I had once known. 2 children who would stand taller than I ever could. When college came, I found a way. Student loans helped, but there was always more to pay. I cleaned houses after hours. I sold my mother's wedding ring to cover my son's final tuition payment. My daughter's textbooks cost more than my monthly groceries, but I handed her the money with a smile. I never let them see my hands tremble. I worked. I cleaned. I fed them before I fed myself. Then came the weddings. They married into better lives. Bigger houses. Nicer cars. Their partners praised how strong I was, how sacrificial. But visits became shorter. Calls became rarer. Holidays were filled with polite excuses. "We're just so busy, Mom." Next time, for sure. And still, I smiled. I told myself this was how it was supposed to be. They had lives of their own now. That's what I worked for. That was the reward. But the silences grew longer. The empty chair at my table stayed empty more often than not. I kept baking pies for no one, setting out plates that stayed untouched. Then, my husband passed. The funeral came and went, and afterward, so did they. No regular visits, no warm embraces, no spontaneous calls to check in. The house grew quiet, and now, they come back. But not for me, not for my stories or my company or my tea. They come for the house, for the deed, for the accounts they suddenly find time to manage. The same children I once fed before feeding myself now circle my assets like vultures drawn to a meal they never earned. I worked. I cleaned. I fed them before I fed myself. I laid down my dreams for theirs. I gave them everything I could carry. And now they don't even visit. At first, I told myself it was just life. Life getting busy, as it does. The phone would ring every so often. But the calls grew shorter. Quick check-ins, wrapped in polite concern. My son's voice came brisk, rushed. Just making sure you're okay, Mom. Work's been crazy. You know how it is. My daughter would call between errands. The kids have soccer and piano in this fundraiser coming up. We'll visit soon, though. Promise. I smiled. I always smiled. Of course, sweetheart. I understand. But the warmth I once felt after their calls began to cool. The pauses between their voices grew longer. The laughter faded into polite questions. Are you still managing your bills okay, Mom? It's a lot for you at your age. I'd reply softly. I've handled my bills all my life. But they pressed on. It's not safe for you to keep track of everything by yourself. Why don't we help? We can set up automatic payments, simplify things. You don't need to worry about that stuff anymore. I wanted to believe they were looking out for me. I clung to that hope. After all, hadn't I raised them to be responsible, to care for family? Then came the talk about the will. It started so casually, as if discussing the weather. My daughter-in-law brought it up first, sitting across from me with her carefully folded hands. You know, Mom, with everything that happened after Dad passed, it might be wise to update your will. Just in case. You want to make sure everything is smooth for us, so we don't have any problems later. Us! She smiled sweetly as if her words were innocent, but I heard the weight behind them. My son nodded in agreement. We're not saying anything is wrong, Mom. It's just being prepared. It's what Dad would have wanted. I looked at them, those faces I had fed, clothed, and carried for decades. I saw not children wanting to protect their mother, but adults circling something valuable. I felt the distance widening, even as they sat only feet away from me. Still, I excused them. I made excuses for the coldness in their voices, for the way their visits became errands, for the way they spoke about me like a task to be managed. I told myself they were busy, that they didn't realize how they sounded, that they still loved me, even if their lives had grown too big, too complicated. The holidays grew quieter. They stopped asking if I needed anything. They started telling me what I needed. You shouldn't be handling the house by yourself anymore, Mom. It's too much. Have you thought about downsizing? Something easier, smaller. We could help you find a nice place. The unspoken part was clear. Easier for them. Still, I wanted to believe. Until one day, the curtain dropped. I received a letter, a legal notice. My bank had contacted me to confirm changes made to my account changes I never authorized. My name rearranged and signed electronically, attached to forms I never saw. My stomach turned cold. The paper shook in my hands. And in that moment, I couldn't pretend anymore. The truth stared back at me, printed in black ink. They weren't waiting for me to need help. They were moving while I was still breathing, preparing for what they assumed was inevitable, clearing the path for my departure on paper while I was still making my own breakfast and reading my own mail. The hope I had clung to for so long slipped through my fingers. I didn't want to believe it, but belief no longer mattered. The evidence was right there, heavy in my lap. The children I raised were no longer protecting me. They were circling me, carefully, quietly, waiting for the moment they thought I wouldn't notice. But I noticed, and I was done pretending. They called it a safety intervention. They said it was for my own good. My daughter-in-law even brought flowers that day, as if that softened what was about to happen. I sat in my own living room, while they stood around me like experts in my life. My son spoke softly, like one might speak to a child. "Mom, we've all talked about it. It's just too much for you now. The house, it's not safe anymore." I looked around the room as he spoke. The lace curtains I sewed. The clock I had saved months of tips to buy. The framed photos I hung with care. My husband's old chair, where he read every evening. This was my home. Not just walls and windows. It was my entire history. And they spoke of it like an old coat to be discarded. I tried to speak to object, but they interrupted gently. Always gently. "Mom, please don't stress yourself. You've done enough. Let us take care of things now." The keys disappeared first. "Just so you don't lose them," my son said, pocketing them with that same careful smile. The paperwork had already been signed, though I never saw it. They had taken my name, my handwriting, and placed it where they wanted it. Forged or coerced, it didn't matter now. The home was sold. Quietly. Cleanly. The house was theirs now. My voice echoed in rooms I no longer owned. They moved me into the facility 2 weeks later. A small, overly bright place with cheerful staff who called me sweetheart and dear, like my name had been forgotten, along with my dignity. My son assured me, "It's a good place, Mom. You'll make friends here. You'll be safe." Safe. That word stung. The nurses fussed over my medications. The social worker smiled too much. They all assumed I was grateful for being looked after. They spoke slowly, as though my mind was slipping, as though the only thing left of me was fragile skin and empty hours. "You don't need to worry about your finances anymore, sweetheart. Your children are taking care of everything." Everything. Yes, they were. The house, the accounts, the bonds, the savings I scraped together for decades. All gone. All managed. All controlled. I was given a tidy schedule of meals and activities like some programmed doll. Bingo on Tuesdays. Chair yoga on Thursdays. The other women here smiled at me, some too tired to remember why they were here, others too broken to fight it. I nodded politely, but inside, I burned. Every night, I stared at the pale ceiling of my little room, listening to the distant hum of televisions behind closed doors, the wheels of carts rolling through the hallway, the soft murmurs of nurses doing rounds. And I whispered to myself, "You're still here. You're still thinking. You're still you." They thought they had won, that I was safely tucked away, docile, grateful. They took everything while smiling, but they mistook stillness for surrender. My body sat, but my mind stood tall. Stronger than ever. They had my house. They had my accounts, but they didn't have me. The nurses called me sweet. The staff called me easy. My son called me safe. But while they all whispered their own versions of my story, I sat quietly by my little window, watching, remembering, writing. I wasn't screaming. I was writing. Each night, once the soft footsteps in the hallway faded, I pulled the small notebook from beneath my mattress. It wasn't much, just a cheap spiral. Pages creased at the corners, but it held everything they thought I'd forgotten. The pen fit neatly between my fingers, my grip still steady enough to record what truly mattered. Names, dates, account numbers. Every transaction they'd hidden behind their well-rehearsed concern. Every property sold under my name. Every account consolidated for my benefit. Every signature that was never mine. They thought they left me in the dark, but I learned to write by candlelight. My eyes watched the way the aides whispered when my son visited. "He's so good to handle all her affairs. Some families aren't so lucky," they'd say. They pitied me, believed the lie he had built for them. When my daughter-in-law appeared, she brought fresh flowers, placed them on the dresser like decorations for a grave. She'd lean in, her voice syrupy and rehearsed. "Everything's in place, Mom. Don't worry yourself." But I watched her fingers tapping quickly on her phone while she pretended to visit. I watched her glance nervously at the papers she kept folded inside her oversized purse. I memorized the names of the realtors she mentioned on those hushed phone calls outside my room. And I wrote it all down. I made no demands, I asked no questions. I let them believe I was growing smaller, fainter, slipping quietly into the shadow of their control. That was their mistake. They forgot who I was. The same hands that once sewed their clothes under the dim glow of a thrift store lamp now held the pen that would undo them. The same eyes that scanned grocery coupons to make every dollar stretch now scanned every line on every statement. I tracked every dollar, every missing bond, every unauthorized withdrawal. They moved quickly, thinking I wouldn't notice, but they couldn't outrun me. When the facility director mentioned offhandedly that my accounts were now fully managed by your family, I smiled. Oh yes, dear. They've been such a help. And then, later that night, I wrote down her name too. I wasn't fading. I was preparing. For years I had held this family together with my bare hands. Now I held my quiet storm in these pages. Patient, precise, unseen. They thought they left me in the dark, but I learned to write by candlelight. And soon, I would turn the light back on. The letter I sent to Mr. Fletcher was short. Just a few lines, written carefully in my own steady hand. He was my late husband's old friend-a-man, who had once handled our small estate paperwork, long before my children learned how to spell inheritance. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I knew he would understand. He arrived at the facility 2 weeks later, carrying a leather briefcase and an expression I hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Not pity, not condescension. Respect. He listened carefully as I laid out every detail from my small notebook, page by page. The dates, the forged signatures, the account transfers, the property sales I never authorized. I watched his face tighten with every fact I recited. When I finished, he closed the notebook gently and placed his hand over mine. You've done well, Ruth. They made one mistake. I raised an eyebrow. Only one? He smiled. They underestimated you. Legal motions were filed within days, quietly. No shouting, no family meetings, no dramatic confrontations. Just the cold language of the law doing what it was always meant to do. The court ordered a full financial audit. Every transaction was laid bare under scrutiny. The signatures, the property deeds, the bank accounts dissected with surgical precision. Then came the medical assessment. They thought they could hide behind whispers of my fading mind. But when the appointed doctor arrived, clipboard in hand, I met his gaze with steady eyes. He asked his questions. Memory, orientation, logic, names, numbers, dates. Every answer came firm, deliberate. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. How many grandchildren do you have, Mrs. Carson? He asked gently. 4, I answered. But that number is irrelevant to the theft committed by their parents. He smiled, pen-tapping. No signs of impairment. Full capacity. And then, finally, the courtroom. I sat there across from my son and daughter-in-law. They avoided my eyes. Their faces pale. Their lawyers stiff. The judge asked if I wished to speak. I rolled forward in my wheelchair. But this time, there was no weakness. Only power. I am competent, Your Honor. And I have evidence. My voice was calm, unshaking. I watched my son flinch as Mr. Fletcher presented every document. The forged signatures exposed by handwriting experts, the unauthorized sales, the forged power of attorney, the systematic removal of my rights while I was fully capable of making my own decisions. The judge ruled quickly. My full legal authority restored. The stolen assets frozen and returned. The sale of my home voided and reversed. My property reclaimed. My accounts fully restored under my sole control. I could feel the weight lifting not from my legs, but from my life. And when it was over, I did something they didn't expect. I stood, slowly, carefully, but entirely on my own 2 feet. The courtroom held its breath as I took a step forward, steady, deliberate. My cane tapped against the marble floor like a drumbeat. I turned toward my children, once mine to protect. Now strangers I no longer recognized. I didn't speak to them. There was nothing left to say. I walked out on my own 2 feet, stronger than ever. I took it all back, quietly. The days that followed were quiet. My kind of quiet. No anger, no shouting. Just steady, deliberate work. With the court ruling in hand, Mr. Fletcher and I moved quickly. The house was mine again, but it no longer held comfort for me. The walls remembered too much. The rooms still echoed with their whispers. So I sold it on my own terms, to a young family just starting out. A couple who reminded me of what my husband and I once were. Hopeful, determined, grateful. The money from the sale was deposited into accounts solely under my name. Accounts they would never touch again. Accounts they once controlled without permission, now frozen beneath layers of legal protection. The rental properties they schemed to inherit? Liquidated. Cleanly, quickly, every dollar secured. My long-forgotten bonds and savings certificates, quietly cashed and safeguarded. They tried to call. The phone rang often, the blinking light flashing like a nervous heartbeat. My son's voice filled the machine, thick with practiced guilt. "Mom, we didn't mean for it to go this far. Please, let's sit down and talk. We're still family." My daughter-in-law left her own messages, laced with forced sweetness. "We just wanted to help. Maybe we made mistakes, but we're all human, right? We can fix this." I never picked up. They mailed letters too. Pages of apologies, explanations, and thinly veiled pleas for another chance. They talked of misunderstandings, of love, of forgiveness, but every word smelled of desperation, not remorse. I smiled as I shredded each letter. They knocked on my door once. A bold move. My son stood there, his shoulders hunched, his face pale. My daughter-in-law clung to his arm, like a child seeking protection. "Mom, please, we don't want to lose you." I stood calmly in the doorway, my hand resting lightly on the frame. You already did. The locks had been changed. The lawyer made sure of that. They stood there for a moment longer, as if hoping my heart would soften. As if the mother who had once fed them before feeding herself still lived in this house. But she no longer did. They turned and walked away, heads bowed, defeated not by rage but by something colder, the clean, quiet absence of control. This was not revenge born from hate. It was not loud or ugly. It was precise, measured. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I simply sold it. All of it. Their imagined inheritance gone. Their quiet assumptions erased. Their safety net cut. And as I sat in my small new home that afternoon, sipping my tea, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not triumph. Not pride. Peace. Real, steady peace. The phone calls came like waves. First steady, then frantic, then pitiful. My voicemail filled with voices that once called me Mom, but now sounded like strangers knocking on a locked door. "Please, Mom, let's talk. We never meant to hurt you. We're still your children. Still my children." As if those words alone could erase what they'd done. The letters came next. Neatly typed, carefully worded apologies not for their actions, but for how things turned out. They wrote of misunderstandings, of family being complicated, of wanting to start fresh. Each envelope arrived like a polite attack, and each one met the same end, quietly shredded, one after the other. Neighbors stopped me on my walks, offering their opinions like gifts wrapped in concern. "Ruth, you know, they're still your children. Maybe it's time to forgive." I smiled politely, nodded gently, and then kept walking. They didn't see the years, the decades of sacrifice, the layers of trust that had been chipped away with every forged signature, every quiet manipulation. I carried them long enough. Through scraped knees, through broken hearts, through sleepless nights filled with worry over tuition bills, mortgage payments, and unpaid medical expenses. I gave without question, without pause. And when my husband died, they didn't come for my comfort. They came for the deed. They came for the papers. They came for the pieces of my life they believed were already theirs. Number. This was not a simple mistake. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a choice. Repeated. Calculated. And now, they wanted forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't free, and I've paid my share. They had my loyalty for decades. My time, my labor, my savings. my love. And when they saw me stumble, they saw an opportunity, not a mother. No more sacrifices, no more second chances, no more quiet allowances for their busyness, no more pretending that my silence was consent. The phone still blinked every few days. The blinking light no longer bothered me. It simply reminded me of how far I had come. The chair by my window felt lighter now. The tea tasted warmer. The books I read filled my mind with stories far sweeter than the one they tried to write for me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was finished. They called. I didn't pick up. The house I live in now is small. Simple. Just enough for me. The rooms are filled with soft light in the mornings and quiet, contented shadows in the evenings. No footsteps rushing down hallways. No voices whispering behind doors. Just the steady hum of my breathing and the gentle creaks of a home that belongs only to me. Each morning, I walk to the garden bed I built, with the help of a kind neighbor, raised high enough that my hands can reach without strain. The soil is soft and dark, warm from the sun. I plant marigolds, lavender, and bright red geraniums. Flowers I never allowed myself to buy when every dollar was stretched for someone else's need. No one sent flowers, so I grew my own. Inside, the bookshelves are full again, not with legal files and bank statements, but with stories I've always wanted to read. Novels long forgotten while I worked double shifts, raised children, and mended clothes late into the night. Now, I read until the chapters blend softly into the stars outside my window. Dinner is quiet now. I set one place. I light a candle. I prepare meals I never had the time or permission to make before, little dishes that bring me comfort. Fresh bread, warm soup, perfectly ripe peaches sliced just for me. I eat slowly, savoring every bite without rushing, without guilt. There is no audience for my peace. No one hurrying me, no one judging. Just me, and that is enough. Sometimes I think of the house they took and how easily I let it go when the time came. Because a house full of whispers is not a home. And this small, bright place, this is mine, entirely mine. The phone is quiet now. The blinking light has long gone dark. The letters stopped arriving months ago. The silence they once gave me, I returned. But, unlike theirs, my silence is not sharp. It is soft. It is steady. It is earned. I was never the burden. I was the one who carried them. I was the one who fed them first, who stayed up late sewing hems and counting coins, who whispered prayers while they slept, who dreamed of their futures while I set aside my own. And now, I carry only myself. This year, when my birthday came, no cards arrived, no phone calls, no voices singing off-key around a kitchen table. But the cake sat warm on my counter, its frosting smooth and simple. And for the first time, I lit my own birthday candles. No one sent flowers, so I grew my own. It began with a conversation. Quiet, small, just two women sitting across from each other at the community center, sipping tea. She asked how I was adjusting to my new place. I smiled and told her I was fine, but she looked at me the way women look when they already know. So I told her, not everything at first, just enough. Enough for her eyes to widen slightly, then soften with something deeper than sympathy recognition. I thought I was the only one, she whispered. She wasn't. The following week, there were 3 of us, then 5. Word traveled gently, like a breeze slipping through open windows. Women from nearby towns, women who hadn't spoken aloud what was done to them, women who had been called burdens, who had watched their children smile while signing away what they had built. We met quietly. No loud meetings, no announcements, just warm cups of tea, folded letters and stories shared in soft voices. Stories that mirrored mine. One lost her farm to a son who simplified the paperwork. Another watched her savings vanish as her daughter handled her retirement. A third was moved into a facility against her will, her home sold before she even packed a bag. Different names, same betrayal. We weren't weak. We were seeds waiting for rain. We compared notes, legal steps, warnings, the names of honest lawyers, the traps hidden in power of attorney documents, the lies disguised as safety. Some of us were still trapped. Some had already fought back. But now, none of us were alone. Letters traveled between us, crossing counties, sometimes states, handwritten notes filled with encouragement, advice, and quiet strength. We whispered the lessons no one had ever taught us. Lessons we should have never needed to learn, but did. We were mothers who once gave everything, and now we gave each other courage. The group grew, not because we shouted, but because we listened. More women joined. Women who had carried others for decades. Women who had been silenced by those they had fed first. Women who finally realized that love does not mean surrender. We weren't angry. We were awake. I hosted many of them in my little house. We sat around my table, drinking tea, sharing recipes, laughter, tears. We weren't victims here. We were teachers. We were a sisterhood built not from bitterness, but from truth. And as I tended to my garden each morning, watching the flowers sway gently in the breeze, I thought about all of us, how they once saw us as frail, as easy, as silent. But we were never that. We were steady, patient, rooted. We weren't weak. We were seeds waiting for rain. And now we are blooming. The will sits on my desk, pages perfectly aligned, each one carefully reviewed, signed by my own steady hand. No one stood behind me this time. No eager voices guiding the pen. No soft suggestions masked as concern. This time, every word is mine. Every decision, mine. Every signature, mine. The names that once filled my world with purpose, my son, my daughter-in-law, do not appear here. Not even once. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But out of truth. They had their chance. They spent my love long ago. The assets they once circled like vultures have been redirected. The money they plotted to inherit now carries a different future. Women's shelters will open doors for those with nowhere else to go. Scholarships will help girls whose hands still hold pencils and dreams, not bills and burdens. Grants will fund programs for women who were called weak when they were simply exhausted from holding everyone else up. My lawyer raised an eyebrow when I first outlined my plan. "You're certain, Ruth?" he asked gently. I smiled. More than I've ever been about anything. And then there were the letters. Dozens of them. Each one handwritten, folded neatly, bundled with soft blue ribbons. Not for my family, but for strangers I'll never meet. Young women stepping into a world that may one day try to shrink them, silence them, strip them. I tell them my story, not to frighten them, but to prepare them. "Dear girl," I write, "you are not fragile. You are not helpless. When they call your silence weakness, remember this. Silence is sometimes where strength sharpens. Protect your name, guard your ground, and know that you are not alone." The courier arrived this morning. The will was handed off with quiet finality. I watched through the window as he walked to his van, carrying the envelope that would deliver my legacy without ceremony, without family gathered around. No dramatic reading, no wide-eyed gasps, no rehearsed sobs of disappointment. They never visited. So I sent the will by courier. I sit by my window now, watching the afternoon sun stretch across my little garden. The marigolds sway gently in the breeze, their golden faces lifted toward the sky. My hands rest in my lap, warm and steady. I have nothing left to prove. They thought my silence was surrender. It was preparation.